The battle between Russia and Ukraine has escalated into Europe's most devastating conflict since World War II, shaking the continent to its core. After years of brutal fighting, the two sides are now entrenched in a war of attrition, a grinding struggle in which neither can easily escalate its efforts, and both must stretch limited resources for incremental gains on the battlefield. In such circumstances, the economy becomes the decisive factor. Who can sustain their army the longest? Who can produce more guns and ammunition? Who can maintain stability on the home front while soldiers push forward on the battlefield? In March 2022, as Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was just gathering pace, U.S. President Joe Biden declared that Western sanctions had put the Russian economy on track to be cut in half, while Russian national currency, the ruble, was being reduced to rubble. Russia is now the most sanctioned country in the world, ahead of Iran, Venezuela, and even North Korea. And while Russia may be the big boss of the post-Soviet region, its GDP is only about 10% of the U.S. economy. And yet, after 3 grueling years of war, Putin's economy defies expectations and remains afloat. Russia's GDP suffered a drop of 1.2% in 2022, but then grew by over 3% in both 2023 and 2024. Prices in Russia are rising due to the government's wartime spending, but the economic impact has not yet reached catastrophic levels. How did Vladimir Putin manage to pull this off? Why isn't the Russian economy crumbling under sanctions like other Western adversaries have in the past? The answer lies in 3 key pillars of Russia's economic resilience, factors that have helped the country withstand the pressures of both sanctions and war. The first is Russia's tight control over its public finances. Steeped in the harsh experiences of the 1990s, when Russia was plagued by triple-digit inflation and a useless tax collection system, Vladimir Putin has been careful to avoid the repeat of these problems during this reign. Putin's key economic advisors came up with a plan to save a portion of the money from Russian sales of its oil and gas. These surplus revenues were funneled into the National Wealth Fund, a financial cushion designed to support long-term investments and cover budget deficits during times of crisis. Thanks to this thriftiness, Russia's national fund grew to 13.6 trillion Russian rubles, about $180 billion, by 2022. This amounted to about 10.2% of Russian GDP at the time. This is a solid nest of reserves, especially considering that even without its rainy day fund, Russia was not used to run large budget deficits and had a debt below 20% of GDP. This is several times less than the vast majority of advanced economies. As a result, by 2022, Russia was ready to handle the extra costs of its invasion. The second pillar of Russia's resilience is its power as a major global oil and gas supplier. Revenues from Russian oil and gas help finance the budgetary expenses. Importantly, energy trade also keeps foreign currency flowing into the Russian pockets, despite Western pressure to isolate Moscow from the global financial system. It works like this. A Russian company can sell oil abroad for UAE dirhams, keep dirhams in an offshore account in Hong Kong or elsewhere, and lend them to Russian importers to be paid back in rubles in Russia. In this way, Russia can continue to buy the goods it needs, such as Western technology, with the money it receives for its energy. Sanctioning Russia's energy trade is hard. Unlike luxury items such as expensive bags or garments, oil and gas are essential resources for industrialized economies. It is used to heat homes and generate electricity to power factories, transport, and other important infrastructure. Russia accounts for around 10% of global oil and gas exports, and this clout on the global markets is what sets Moscow apart from other targets of Western sanctions, such as Iran, which the West has banned from selling any oil on the world market. The problem is that if you take all Russian oil and gas off the world market at once, you will create a global shortage that can send oil and gas prices soaring. In the end, Russia might even manage to sell its oil and gas to desperate consumers at an even higher price than it would have sold it in a no-sanctions scenario. That is why the West has limited itself to piecemeal sanctions on Russia's energy trade, which cut into Russia's revenues. Moscow loses money by having to pay middlemen to conduct business, or for more expensive shipping arrangements that are safe from sanctions. For example, the Kremlin has had to redirect oil exports from Europe to India and China, although this route is more expensive due to longer voyages and the cost of the so-called shadow fleet of vessels used to skirt sanctions. The same goes for gas. Russia has cut its supplies to Europe and now has China as its main buyer, even though the capacity of gas pipelines to China is lower and Beijing pays less than Europe. Consequently, Russia's net energy revenues are lower than before the war, but still sufficient to run its war economy. The third pillar of Russia's resilience is its effort to rein in war spending. Vladimir Putin surprised many when he appointed a civilian economist, Andrei Belousov, to head Russia's defense ministry. Belousov, the son of a Soviet-era reform economist, brings a technocratic approach to managing military expenditures. The appointment signals a clear intention to keep the costs of war within manageable limits, even if it means scaling back the ambitions of Russia's invasion. As a result, Russia's war spending, estimated at between 6.2% and 9%, is high by historical standards, but moderate when compared to other countries at war or even the Soviet Union. To put this in context, Russia spends about as much on defense as a share of GDP as oil-rich Saudi Arabia spent between 2001 and 2020, or what the U.S. spent between 1966 and 1975 during its involvement in Vietnam. By contrast, Ukraine spends close to 40% of its GDP on war. Consequently, Russia's war goals had to be moderated, and Moscow has failed to capture any major Ukrainian cities after its initial invasion choked in the summer of 2022. Instead, Russia has tried to advance town by town, concentrating its efforts on capturing the whole of Donbass, an area of eastern Ukraine made up of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions on the right bank of the Dnipro River. So whatever political ambitions drive Vladimir Putin's foreign policy, it is fair to say that he can adapt his tactics to economic realities. Unlike the behemoth that was the Soviet war machine, which gobbled up the civilian economy with an insatiable appetite and no regard for long-term prospects, Putin's Russia is more nimble and agile. Of course, all this comes at a price. Russia's civilian economy is being cannibalized in favor of the spending associated with the military-industrial complex. The volume of Russian industrial production in 2024 was 9.7% higher than in 2022 and 14.2% higher than in 2020. However, companies that are not tied to government contracts and work with the private sector are facing problems in hiring workers, borrowing in conditions of high interest rates, and fears of deteriorating demand. So whether Russia can survive the war in the coming global economic turmoil remains to be seen. While Russia has so far responded to economic challenges in cold blood, the scale of the pressure on the Kremlin may yet prove to be too great to overcome.